The slap wasn't loud, not in the way explosions or car crashes are loud, but it cracked through the air like ice splitting underfoot. One moment I was standing near the edge of the reception tent, adjusting the strap of my navy bridesmaid dress, trying to disappear into the folds of white linen and fairy lights. The next, my head snapped sideways, my ear ringing, my cheek burning as if someone had pressed a hot coin against my skin. My father's hand, broad, familiar, the same one that once held mine as I crossed the street, had struck me in front of 200 people. Grandparents, cousins I hadn't seen since high school, my brother's college friends, the caterers pausing mid-pour, even the string quartet faltering on a note. "Don't embarrass your brother on his wedding day," he hissed, voice low but sharp as a scalpel, meant only for me, but everyone heard, everyone saw. I didn't cry, not then. My eyes strung, yes, but I kept them wide open, refusing to blink, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch twice. Inside, though, something fractured. Not my spirit, no, that had been tempered long before today, but the last thread of hope that maybe, just this once, they'd let me exist without performance. I hadn't even done anything. I'd merely stepped back when my brother, 3 bourbons deep and grinning like a boy who'd never faced consequence, lunged to hug me, his cologne thick with entitlement. I said, "Not right now," softly, respectfully. That was my crime. Silence pooled around us, thick and suffocating. Aunts exchanged glances. My mother looked down at her champagne flute like it might save her. And then, just as my throat tightened with the weight of swallowing yet another humiliation for the sake of family harmony, a new voice cut through the tension, calm as morning light. "Actually," it said, "she's my wife." All heads turned. At the entrance of the tent, where the gravel path met the lawn, stood Daniel. My Daniel. Not in a rented tux like the groomsmen, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, just the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly where he stood. In his hand wasn't a gift or a card, but a manila folder stamped with the county seal. He walked forward with unhurried steps, eyes locked on my father, and stopped just 2 feet from me. "And you," he continued, voice still level, still controlled, "are trespassing." A ripple went through the crowd. My brother scoffed. "What the hell are you talking about? This is our house." Daniel didn't look at him, he looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded once. Then he turned to my father, opened the folder and said, "As of last Tuesday, this property is held in a revocable trust with Marlowe listed as primary beneficiary and co-trustee. You and your wife retain occupancy rights only through December 31st, contingent on no further acts of harassment. That," he added, glancing pointedly at my reddening cheek, "appears to be a violation." No one moved, no one breathed. The house behind us, the grand, ivy-clad Georgian my parents had spent years renovating with money I'd quietly funneled into their accounts under the guise of gifts, suddenly felt like a stage set, and the script had just flipped. My father's face went pale, then red, then something in between, like a man realizing too late that the ground beneath him isn't solid but sand. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I just reached for Daniel's hand, felt the steady warmth of his grip and whispered, "Thank you." Because in that moment, I wasn't the quiet daughter, the compliant sister, the family peacekeeper. I was seen. And more than that, I was protected. The slap had been meant to silence me. Instead, it opened the door. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people scroll past on Instagram and think, "Wow, they have it all together." Matching holiday pajamas. Group photos with everyone smiling just enough, not too wide, not too stiff, arranged like ornaments on the mantle of normalcy. My mother's handwritten birthday cards arrived like clockwork, always signed "Love you to the moon and back," even in the years she hadn't once asked how I was really doing. My brother's graduation, his engagement party, even his first DUI, they were all framed as family milestones. Moments we were expected to celebrate without question, without critique, without cost, except they always cost me something. Time, money, peace. I was the daughter who didn't cause waves. The one who stayed late to help Mom pack wedding favors while my brother played golf. The one who quietly transferred $3,000 when Dad's investment fell through, again because family takes care of family, even when family never took care of me. I bought my brother's tuxedo rental, paid for the rehearsal dinner flowers, even edited his wedding vows because you're so good with words. And every time I did, I told myself it was love. But somewhere along the way, I began to notice the pattern. My generosity was treated as obligation, my boundaries as betrayal, my silence as consent. That's why I married Daniel in secret. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if they knew I'd found someone who saw me, who valued my quiet strength instead of exploiting it, they'd do what they always did, make it about them. They'd demand a big wedding they couldn't afford, but would expect me to fund. They insist on family involvement that meant my father approving the guest list or my brother giving me away like I was property being transferred. They'd turn my joy into another performance, another debt, another thing they could claim as theirs. So we kept it quiet. Just us, a justice of the peace, 2 witnesses from Daniel's office, and rings exchanged under a cloudy sky on a Tuesday afternoon in March. No photos, no announcements, just vows spoken in clear, calm voices, the kind that don't need an audience to be real. Daniel understood. He'd seen the texts I still kept. Why are you being so selfish? After everything we've done for you. And he knew that in my family, love came with strings so tightly wound they left marks. Marrying him wasn't rebellion, it was preservation. It was me finally choosing a future where I wouldn't have to disappear to keep the peace. And that's why when my father slapped me at the wedding, the very event I'd poured myself into to prove I was still one of them, it didn't just hurt my face, it broke the illusion. Because in that moment I realized no amount of compliance would ever be enough. They didn't want me to belong, they wanted me to obey. So if you've ever hidden your happiness because you knew it would be weaponized against you, if you've ever stayed silent to avoid becoming the family villain, if you've ever given and given until you weren't sure where you ended and their expectations began, drop a lock in the comments. Not as a symbol of secrecy, but of sanctuary. Because sometimes, the most radical act of self-love is keeping your joy out of reach of those who only know how to take. And trust me, when the truth finally steps into the room, it doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a key. The house stood at the end of a winding oak-lined drive, its white columns gleaming under string lights on the night of the wedding, all grandeur and grace, a monument to the life my parents claimed they'd built. To guests it was a dream, wide porches, a sunroom with wicker furniture, French doors that opened onto a terrace where champagne flutes clinked like wind chimes. But I knew the truth beneath the polished surface. I knew which floorboard creaked outside my old bedroom, the one I'd tiptoed across at 3 a.m. after late-night crying jags I couldn't explain even to myself. I knew which faucet dripped in the guest bath, the one my father refused to fix because it's not your room anyway. I knew the weight of every brick, not because I'd laid them, but because I'd helped pay for them, quietly, repeatedly, under the gentle coercion of family duty. It had started small. A loan for the new roof after the storm, $12,000, never repaid, never even acknowledged as debt. Then came the kitchen renovation. Your brother's getting married soon. We need to impress his fiancée's family. I handed over $27,000 from my savings, labelled it a gift in their group chat so no one would suspect tension. Later, the landscaping, the security system, the guesthouse addition, all funded in part by me, each contribution wrapped in guilt like tissue paper. You know how much this means to your mother, or we're counting on you to help make this perfect. But the real story wasn't in the marble countertops or the restored hardwood floors. It was in the quiet clicks of bureaucracy, the county assessor's website I'd visited late at night, the deed records I'd printed and tucked into a folder labelled Utilities. It was in the mortgage statements that arrived monthly, the ones I'd photocopied before slipping them back into the mailbox when no one was looking. And it was in the brass doorknobs, cold, heavy, gleaming, that turned with a satisfying snick every time I entered a room, as if the house itself was keeping secrets behind each closed door. That brass key, the one my grandmother had pressed into my palm during her last lucid week, became my motif. She'd whispered, this house was never theirs to give away. It was always meant to shelter the one who truly cared for it. At the time, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Now I knew better. Because while everyone else saw a venue, a backdrop for my brother's big day, I saw a ledger. Every tile, every beam, every inch of manicured lawn had a hidden price tag, paid in more than money. It was paid in swallowed words, in cancelled plans, in the slow erosion of my right to say no. The house wasn't just a home. It was a ledger of sacrifice, and my name was written in invisible ink on every page. And that day, standing in the aisle with my cheek burning and my breath shallow, I finally understood. You can't reclaim your life by asking nicely. Sometimes you have to rekey the locks. For as long as I could remember, love in our family came with conditions and consequences. After all we've done for you, my father would say whenever I hesitated to hand over money or cancel my plans to accommodate theirs. Your brother needs this more than you do. my mother would add, her voice soft but firm, as if fairness were a luxury we couldn't afford. They didn't shout. They didn't chain me to the basement. Their control was quieter, more insidious. A slow drip of obligation that, over years, pooled into a lake I couldn't swim out of. I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who understood how things worked. And because I never made a scene, they assumed I agreed. When I started therapy at 28, after a panic attack in the grocery store parking lot that left me gasping on the pavement, they called it selfish. Real women don't need strangers to tell them how to feel, my aunt clucked over Sunday dinner while my father stared at his plate like my pain was a personal insult. When I stopped sending monthly gifts and redirected that money into my own emergency fund, my mother sent a text that simply read, "Guess we raised you wrong." Not "Are you okay?" Not "What's going on?" Just condemnation wrapped in disappointment, served cold. But the real turning point came the day I told them about Daniel. Not that we were engaged, just that I was seeing someone serious. Within an hour, my brother called to joke that I'd better not bring him to Thanksgiving unless he could prove he's good enough for this family. My father followed up with a lecture about marrying up, implying that unless Daniel had a six-figure income and a family name, he wasn't worth my time. That's when I knew they didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be dependent. So I stopped sharing, I stopped explaining. And when Daniel proposed under a harvest moon with a ring he'd designed himself, a simple band with a tiny sapphire, my birthstone, I said yes and told no one, not out of shame but strategy, because Daniel wasn't just kind, he was brilliant. A real estate attorney who specialized in asset protection and elder financial abuse cases. Within weeks of meeting me, he'd quietly asked, "How much have you actually paid toward that house?" Not with judgment, with curiosity. And when I showed him the spreadsheets I'd kept hidden in a password-protected file, every transfer, every receipt, every gift logged with dates and amounts, he didn't flinch. He just said, "You're not just a daughter, you're a creditor." That reframing changed everything. The wedding was their final play. A public spectacle meant to lure me back into the fold, to remind everyone, including me, that I belonged to them. They planned it at the house to maximize emotional leverage. "It'll mean so much to your grandmother," they said, even though she hadn't stepped foot inside in 3 years. They made me a bridesmaid to force me into their narrative, to make me complicit in the celebration of the very brother who'd once told me, "You'll never find someone who puts up with you like we do." But what they didn't know was that while they were choosing floral arrangements, I was signing documents. While they were toasting to family legacy, I was building a legal foundation. And while my father raised his hand to slap me for daring to set a boundary in front of witnesses, Daniel was already en route, not to rescue me, but to restore what was mine. Because the risk wasn't just my dignity anymore. It was their entire illusion of ownership, over the house, over my loyalty, over my future. And illusions, no matter how grandly staged, crumble the moment someone turns on the lights. She sat in the front row in a wheelchair draped with a cashmere shawl the colour of storm clouds, her knuckles resting on the armrests like weathered stones. At 93, Grandma Alina hadn't spoken much in months. Her words had grown sparse, rationed like precious water. But her eyes, those still saw everything. They tracked the way my father's jaw tightened when I declined a third glass of champagne. They noted how my brother leaned into the laughter of his friends like armor. And they locked onto mine the moment my cheek strung from the slap, steady, silent, full of a fury so deep it didn't need volume. I didn't go to her right away. I couldn't. My body was still humming with shock, my breath shallow, my hands trembling in the folds of my dress. But as the murmurs swelled and the string quartet fumbled back into Pachelbel's canon, I felt a gentle tap on my elbow. One of the elder cousins, Aunt Miriam, who'd always liked me better than my brother, nodded toward the garden path. "She's asking for you," she whispered. "Says it's urgent." I found her beneath the magnolia tree, its petals falling like confetti on the grass. The wedding chaos felt miles away. She reached for my hand with surprising strength, her skin paper-thin but her grip firm. Without a word, she turned my face toward the fading light, studied the red mark blooming on my cheek, and then, slowly, deliberately, pressed her palm against it, as if to absorb the pain into herself. "He never owned you," she said, her voice raspy but clear, each syllable carved from decades of silence broken only when it mattered. "Not your heart, not your choices, and certainly not that house." I blinked, stunned. She hadn't used full sentences in weeks. Then with a trembling hand, she pointed to her woven handbag on the wheelchair tray. "Look," she urged. Inside, beneath a folded handkerchief smelling of lavender and mothballs, was a manila envelope. My name was written on it in her looping cursive, the same hand that once pennied birthday cards with pressed violets tucked inside. I opened it right there, beneath the tree, as birdsong and distant laughter floated on the air. It was a notarized letter, dated October 12, 2019, just 3 months after my father had pressured me into signing a fake house maintenance agreement that effectively waived any claim I might have. In crisp, legal phrasing Grandma could never have drafted alone, but clearly understood. She stated that she, Elena Winthrop, sole holder of a 30% undivided interest in the property at 472 Crestview Lane, hereby irrevocably transferred her share to her granddaughter, conditional upon her emancipation from coercive familial dynamics, as evidenced by her pursuit of independent housing and financial autonomy. There was a witness signature, her longtime accountant, and a notary stamp from the bank downtown. At the bottom, in her own hand, she'd added, "You earned this with every quiet no they tried to drown out. Keep going." I looked up, tears finally spilling over, but she was already shaking her head. "Don't cry for me," she whispered. "Cry for the years you gave them, then never give another." In that moment, I wasn't just validated, I was witnessed. Not as the compliant daughter, not as the backup plan, but as the rightful heir to a legacy they'd tried to erase. Grandma hadn't just believed me, she'd armed me. And as I tucked the letter back into the envelope, feeling its weight like a shield, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The elder ally had spoken, and her truth came with a paper trail. That night, long after the last guest had stumbled into a rideshare, and the caterers had packed away the silver platters, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table of our apartment, milk mugs steaming between us, the city humming outside our window like a lullaby for the wounded. My cheek was iced, my dress hung over the back of a chair like a shed skin, and my hands still trembled slightly, though not from fear anymore. From clarity. Daniel didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, "You should have left sooner," or "I told you so." Instead, he opened his laptop, pulled up a folder labeled Crestview Preliminary, and said, "Show me everything." So I did. From a fireproof safe beneath our bed, a gift from him after my third panic attack over a family holiday, I retrieved the binder I'd been building for 2 years. Not out of malice, out of survival. Page by page, I laid out the receipts of my erasure. Bank statements with highlighted transfers totaling $187,432.68, all sent to my parents over 7 years with notes like roof repair, June 2021, or kitchen backsplash, per Mom's request. Each one bore my signature on the memo line, each labelled internally in my ledger as loan, verbal agreement, non-interest bearing, though never acknowledged as such by them. Then came the mortgage documents. The original 2015 loan was in my parents' names, yes, but when they refinanced in 2022 during my brother's so-called career transition, a 6-month stint as a crypto consultant that ended in debt, they'd included my W-2s and tax returns in the application. Not because I was a co-borrower, legally I wasn't, but because my income strengthened the file. The loan officer had told me when I'd called, posing as a curious niece. Those documents were still in my possession because I'd asked for a copy for my records during a visit, and my mother, ever eager to prove how together they were, handed them over without a second thought. But the real bombshell was Grandma's letter, the notarized equity transfer. Daniel read it twice, his brow furrowed, then leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This is gold," he said quietly, "not just morally, but legally. In most jurisdictions, a documented partial ownership stake combined with consistent financial contributions toward property improvement creates what's called equitable title. You may not be on the deed, but you've got a claim." He opened a new tab, pulled up the county assessor's portal and typed in the address. The screen refreshed, 472 Crestview Lane. Owner, Robert and Helen Winthrop. But then he clicked document history and there it was, a 2019 quitclaim deed recorded but never publicized, transferring Elena Winthrop's 30% interest to Marla Winthrop with right of survivorship. My name, in the system, all this time. I stared at the screen, breath catching. They'd known, they'd always known, and they'd buried it hoping I'd never dig. Daniel reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "This isn't just proof you were used," he said gently. "It's proof you were owed." We spent the rest of the night cross-referencing dates. Every payment I made aligned with major renovations they'd touted as their legacy. The $42,000 bathroom remodel, funded the week after I got my promotion. The $18,000 patio, paid the day I declined to lend my brother money for a business idea. It wasn't generosity. It was extraction, disguised as love, documented as gifts, but logged in my heart as debt. By dawn we had a timeline, a paper trail, a legal foothold. The slap had been the spark. But these receipts, they were the fuel. For a fleeting moment after that night with Daniel, after the documents were organized, the timeline mapped, the legal strategy outlined, I allowed myself to hope it could end quietly. That maybe, just maybe, they'd see reason. That if I offered a clean exit, they'd take it with dignity instead of digging deeper into denial. So I drafted an email, calm, factual, devoid of accusation, and sent it 3 days after the wedding. I proposed buying out their remaining equity at fair market value, using a neutral appraiser. I even offered to let them stay in the house for 6 months rent-free while they found a new place. All I asked in return was acknowledgement, that my contributions mattered, that my boundaries were valid, and that the house would no longer be used as a weapon to control me. I waited. And then came brunch. They invited me to clear the air at the house, just family, no guests, no drama. My mother set the table with the good china. My brother poured mimosas with a smirk. My father carved a honey-glazed ham like nothing had happened. For 20 minutes they made small talk about the weather, a neighbour's dog, the price of gas, anything but the letter I'd sent or the bruise that had only just faded from my cheek. Then over coffee my father leaned back, steepled his fingers and said with a condescending chuckle, "You're reading too much into things, sweetheart. This house has always been your brother's future. You know that. You've always been supportive." Supportive, the word landed like a stone in my stomach. Not valued, not respected. Supportive, as if my entire existence had been a supporting role in their family epic. "That's not what Grandma's deed says," I replied, my voice steady. My brother snorted. Grandma was senile, everyone knows that. The cruelty of it, the casual dismissal of a woman who'd taught him to tie his shoes, who'd held him when he broke his arm at 10, made my fists clench under the table. But I didn't rise to it. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the county records app and turned the screen toward them. "Then explain this." They barely glanced. My father waved a hand. "Paperwork means nothing. Blood means everything. You'll never take this house from us." 2 days later, I got a call from the utility company. The house phone line, still in my name from when I'd set it up years ago, had been flagged for suspicious activity. When I checked my online account, I saw why. 3 months of electric, water and gas bills had gone unpaid. But that wasn't possible. I'd set up autopay from my personal account, $850 a month like clockwork for the past 4 years. I logged in to investigate, only to find the payment method had been changed. Not by me. By someone with access to the homeowner portal, someone who'd used my father's email to reset the credentials. At the same time, a mutual cousin texted me a screenshot from a private Facebook group. A post from my brother captioned, "Some people fake poverty to play victim while secretly hoarding family money." Sad. Beneath it, a cropped image of one of my bank transfers, dated but stripped of context, with the words gift or theft scrawled over it in red. The dual assault was precise. Financial sabotage to undermine my credibility, and public smearing to isolate me from the few relatives who might believe me. They weren't just defending their ownership, they were erasing my truth before it could take root. That night I called Daniel. "Peaceful resolution is off the table," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. He didn't hesitate. "Then we go to court." Because I finally understood, kindness without consequences isn't compassion. It's permission. And I was done giving it. The county records office smelled of old paper, lemon-scented cleaner, and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights that had flickered the same rhythm for decades. It was a place where history wasn't whispered. It was filed, indexed, and stamped with the quiet authority of bureaucracy. Daniel and I arrived just after 9 on a Tuesday morning, the kind of day that blends into the background of ordinary life, unaware it's about to become someone's turning point. He carried a leather satchel. I carried my grandmother's letter like a talisman in my coat pocket. We didn't need to ask for help. Daniel knew exactly which microfiche drawers to pull, which digital terminals pulled live feeds from the assessor's database, which clerk had been there since the 90s and remembered every Winthrop filing. Within 20 minutes, he'd printed 3 key documents, each one landing on the table between us with the weight of revelation. First, the 2022 refinance agreement. At first glance it looked standard, my parents listed as primary borrowers, the house as collateral. But then Daniel pointed to the second page, a covert field filled in with my brother's name, below it a signature. Except my brother hadn't signed it. We knew because 2 weeks prior, Daniel had obtained a copy of his actual signature from a car loan application, clean, modern, with a distinctive loop on the Y, the one on the mortgage. Angular, hesitant, missing that loop entirely, a forgery. But the real bombshell came next. Buried in the property tax records was a homestead exemption, form filed in March 2023, right after the $72,000 kitchen and patio renovation was completed. In our state, such exemptions freeze the assessed value of a primary residence, shielding owners from steep tax hikes after major improvements. But to qualify, the applicant must swear under penalty of perjury that they occupy the property as their sole and primary residence. My parents had checked that box. Problem was they hadn't lived there full-time since January. They moved to a condo in Sarasota, for the winters, they'd said, keeping the house only for family events and your brother's wedding. Daniel pulled their Florida voter registration, their utility bills from the condo, even a dated photo from their Facebook showing them at a beachside restaurant in February. All of it proved they were no longer legal residents. Filing that exemption wasn't just a mistake, it was fraud. And fraud, in the eyes of the law, voids the protections it grants. But we weren't done. Daniel then pulled the chain of title, the full lineage of ownership for 472 Crestview Lane. There it was, the 2019 quitclaim deed transferring Grandma's 30% stake to me, recorded but never challenged. Then he overlaid my payment logs, $187,000 in documented contributions, against the renovation permits filed with the city. Every major improvement that increased the home's value had been funded in part by me. In legal terms, that created an equitable lien, a claim not based on name on a deed, but on financial contribution toward the asset's enhancement. He looked at me, eyes sharp with quiet triumph. They didn't just take your money, they used it to inflate their asset, then tried to lock you out. That's unjust enrichment, and it's actionable. By noon, we were in his office. By 2, he drafted an emergency motion to partition the property, a legal mechanism that forces the sale of jointly held real estate when co-owners can't agree. He also filed a separate petition for reimbursement of unjust enrichment, citing every transfer, every forgery, every fraudulent exemption. And then he called the sheriff's civil division. Not for drama, for service. Because paperwork alone isn't power until it's enforced. As we walked out of the courthouse later that day, the autumn sun low and golden, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not vengeance, but alignment. The truth wasn't just in my heart anymore. It was in the system. Stamped, indexed. Official. I sent the invitations on a Thursday, elegant cream cards with simple script. Family gathering brunch at Crestview. 11 a.m. Saturday, please come. No mention of legal matters, no hint of what was coming, just the gentle summons of a daughter trying to mend things, and they came. Of course they came. They thought it was surrender. My father wore his best polo, my mother her pearl necklace, my brother a smirk that said he already knew he'd won. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even the ones who'd seen the Facebook post, arrived with casserole dishes and hopeful smiles, ready to witness my apology, my reintegration into the fold. The house looked perfect. Sunlight poured through the French doors, mimosas chilled in crystal pitchers. Croissants steamed on porcelain platters. It was the same stage as the wedding, only smaller, more intimate, the kind of setting where hard truths are usually softened with butter and small talk. I let them eat, let them laugh, let my brother hold court about his next big venture. I poured coffee, passed the jam, asked after Aunt Carol's hip surgery. And then, when the last bite was taken and the clinking of cutlery faded, I stood. "I'm glad you're all here," I said, voice calm, clear, carrying just enough to reach the back of the sunroom. "Because what happens next affects each of you, not just as family but as witnesses." My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, the front door opened. Daniel walked in, not with fanfare but with quiet authority, followed by a uniformed deputy from the county sheriff's civil division. The room went still. My brother's fork clattered onto his plate. Daniel nodded to me, then stepped aside as I walked to the center of the room, the same spot where I stood the day I was slapped. Only this time I held a manila envelope sealed with a red court stamp. 2 days ago, I began, the Superior Court granted an emergency motion to partition the property at 472 Crestview Lane. Due to evidence of fraudulent documentation, unjust enrichment, and breach of fiduciary duty, the court has ordered that the home be placed in receivership pending sale. I opened the envelope, pulled out the certified copy and handed it to my father. His hands shook as he took it. Additionally, I continued, per the court's interim order, all current occupants, meaning you, Mom and Dad, have 14 days to vacate the premises. Personal belongings may be removed during daylight hours, supervised by the court-appointed receiver. Any attempt to remove fixtures, damage the property, or interfere with the sale will result in immediate contempt proceedings. My mother gasped, "You can't do this, this is our home." "It was never solely yours," I said gently but firmly, "and it certainly wasn't yours to weaponize." Then I looked at my brother. "And you, the forged signature on the 2022 mortgage, the sheriff will be serving you separately with a subpoena for deposition. Civil fraud carries financial penalties and potential criminal referral if the district attorney finds intent." He turned pale. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't gloat. I simply stood there rooted as the truth settled over them like dust after an earthquake. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. And as the deputy stepped forward to confirm the notice had been legally served, his badge glinting in the morning light, I saw it in their eyes. Not anger, not yet, but the dawning horror of realization. They built their power on the assumption that I wouldn't fight. That I'd stay quiet. That I'd disappear. But I hadn't. I'd documented. I'd lied. I'd waited. And now, in the very room where they'd tried to shame me into silence, I'd turned their stage into a courtroom. The house still stood. But the foundation, that had already shifted. The hearing was held in a modest courtroom downtown, wood-panelled walls, a flag in the corner, fluorescent lights that buzzed like distant bees. No dramatic gavel slams, no shouting matches. Just a judge with tired eyes and a stack of exhibits thicker than a novel. My parents sat on one side of the aisle, my brother beside them, all three dressed in what I recognized as their respectable clothes, the kind they wore to church or parent-teacher conferences, as if morality could be tailored. Daniel sat beside me, his presence a quiet anchor. And in the back row, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm day, sat Grandma Alina, her hands folded over her walker, her gaze fixed on the bench like a sentinel. I didn't take the stand angry, I took it clear. When the judge asked me to present my account, I didn't recount the slap. That wasn't the crime, it was the symptom. Instead, I walked through a timeline, printed on large poster boards and entered into evidence. Every payment I'd made, every email requesting repayment that went unanswered, every time I'd been told my financial help was expected, because I owed them for raising me. I spoke of the forged mortgage signature, the fraudulent homestead exemption, the way my income had been used to qualify for loans I never agreed to. I didn't call them liars. I let the documents speak. Then came the moment I'd prepared for and feared. Daniel stood, adjusted his glasses and said, "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play a voicemail recording entered as Exhibit 14, timestamped June 12, 2024, 8 days before the wedding." My father stiffened. The clerk pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, low, impatient, edged with threat. "Listen, Marlo, you will be at that wedding, you will smile, you will hug your brother like a proper sister, and you will not, do you hear me, not say one word about money, about the house, about anything. Because if you ruin this for him, you'll never set foot in that house again. It'll be gone before you can blink." A murmur ran through the courtroom, even the bailiff glanced up. I'd recorded it because after years of gaslighting I'd learned to trust paper and sound more than memory. I'd warned him I recorded calls after he'd denied ever asking for just $5,000 during a previous dispute, but he hadn't believed me, or maybe he just didn't care. The judge removed her glasses, rubbed the bridge of her nose and said, "Mr. Winthrop, is this your voice?" He didn't answer. She turned to me. "Ms. Winthrop, did you feel threatened by this message?" "I felt seen," I said quietly. "Not as a daughter, but as a liability to be managed. That call wasn't about love, it was about control." The judge nodded slowly, then looked at my parents. "What I'm hearing isn't just a property dispute, it's a pattern of financial coercion, what we in probate often call elder abuse by proxy. You used your daughter's income, her goodwill and her silence to inflate your asset, then attempted to disinherit her emotionally and legally when she sought autonomy." She paused. That stops today. She ruled from the bench, the partition would proceed. The house would be listed within 30 days. My documented contributions, $187,000 plus Grandma's 30% equity, entitled me to 52% of net proceeds. My parents would repay $43,000 in unjust enrichment, and any further attempts to harass or defame me would be treated as contempt. No grand speeches, no tears, just justice clean and codified. As we filed out, Grandma reached for my hand. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was sharp as a blade. You read them the truth, she whispered, not with fire, with facts. And that, I realized, was the most public accountability of all. Not spectacle, but clarity. Not rage, but reckoning. Spoken plainly, backed by proof. And sealed with the quiet click of a gavel. The ruling didn't arrive with sirens or spotlights. It came in a manila envelope hand-delivered by a courier on a Tuesday afternoon, sealed with the courthouse insignia and smelling faintly of ink and damp paper. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same one where Daniel and I had laid out my first receipts months earlier, and read the judge's order aloud, my voice steady but my hands trembling just slightly. Every word had been precise, deliberate, final. The fraudulent refinance clauses voided, the forged co-borrower signature deemed legally invalid, the homestead exemption rescinded with retroactive tax implications. And then, the heart of it. Plaintiff Marlo Winthrop is awarded 52% ownership interest in the real property, located at 472 Crestview Lane, plus reimbursement of $43,218 in unjust enrichment, to be drawn from the net proceeds of the court-ordered sale. 52%, not a majority, but enough. Enough to control the listing, to veto lowball offers, to ensure the house didn't vanish into a family deal with my brother's investor friend. Enough to turn years of silent sacrifice into quantifiable equity. Within a week, a court-appointed realtor placed the for sale sign at the end of the drive, the same spot where wedding guests had once parked under twinkling lights. The listing went live: 4 bedrooms, updated kitchen, sunroom with southern exposure, original hardwoods, classic Georgian elegance. No mention of the drama. No hint of the battle, just facts like the ruling itself. My parents didn't fight it, not really. They packed boxes in silence, their movements slow, their voices hushed. I watched from across the street one evening as my father stood on the front porch, keys in hand, staring at the brass doorknob like it might explain how everything had slipped through his fingers. He didn't look angry. He looked small. The man who once commanded every room with a glance now couldn't even hold onto the house he'd treated as his throne. The reversal wasn't flashy, it was procedural. It was bank wires rerouted, title abstracts updated, lien releases filed. It was Daniel handing me a copy of the new ownership schedule, my name printed clearly under beneficial interest. It was the moment I walked through the empty house one last time before the open house, not to mourn but to witness. I ran my fingers over the piano where I'd practiced as a child, now silent. I stood in the sunroom where I'd been slapped, now bathed in golden light. And I went to the front door, the one with the brass knob I'd turned 1,000 times, and placed my palm flat against the wood. This was mine, not by inheritance, not by favor, but by right. And when the listing agent arrived, clipboard in hand, I didn't hand her the keys like a defeated heir. I handed them like a principal. Because justice, when it's lawful and earned, doesn't roar. It settles, quietly, permanently, and with receipts. They didn't lose everything, not in the way movie villains do, vanishing into obscurity with nothing but a suitcase and a curse. My parents kept their Sarasota condo, their social security checks, their circle of golfing friends who politely changed the subject when the family situation came up. My brother moved into a 1-bedroom apartment downtown, took a job at a car dealership, temporarily, and stopped posting on social media altogether. There were no arrests, no bankruptcies, no public shamming beyond the whispers that naturally follow when a family's private fractures become legal record. But they lost something far more valuable to them: control. And with it, the illusion that their narrative was the only one that mattered. At first they tried to rewrite the story. My mother called Aunt Carol tearful, claiming I'd ambushed them with lawyers and stolen Grandma's final gift to my brother. But when Carol, ever practical, asked to see the deed, my mother couldn't produce it. Then Uncle Ray, who'd always admired Grandma's sharp mind, reached out to me directly. "Send me the court order," he said. I did. 2 days later, he forwarded it to the entire extended family group chat with a single line: Elena knew what she was doing, always did. The shift was subtle but seismic. Holiday invitations stopped coming. My father's annual family update email, once a proud chronicle of their legacy, went silent. At the town's summer fundraiser, cousins who used to avoid my gaze now pulled me aside with quiet words. "We're proud of you," or "We had no idea it was that bad." Not everyone came around, some preferred the comfort of denial, but enough did to change the family's emotional geography. The real consequence wasn't financial, though that strung, it was social. The house had been their stage, their proof of success, the backdrop against which they performed good parenting and strong family values. Without it, their authority crumbled. Relatives no longer deferred to my father's opinions at gatherings. My brother's tall tales about investments were met with polite skepticism. Even my mother's carefully curated image, the gracious matriarch, faded when people realized her kindness had always come with invisible strings. But the most telling moment came months later at a mutual cousin's baby shower. I arrived early to help set up, and as I unfolded a card table, I overheard two aunts talking in the kitchen. "Did you hear Robert's trying to get a reverse mortgage on the condo?" one asked. "After what happened with Marlowe's house, no bank will touch him without a co-signer," the other replied. "Serves him right. You don't treat your own child like an ATM and expect the world to keep smiling." No one shouted, no one disowned them. But the family ecosystem had recalibrated, naturally, organically, because truth once documented and shared cannot be unseen. Their downfall wasn't my doing. It was the weight of their own choices, finally meeting gravity. And in the quiet aftermath, I realized, sometimes the most powerful consequence is simply being seen for who you really are. It was a Tuesday in early spring when she called, not my father, never him, but my mother. Her voice on the line was thin, frayed at the edges, stripped of the practiced warmth she used for holiday cards and voicemails meant for an audience. "Marlowe," she began, then paused, as if testing the name to see if it still belonged to me. I'd like to see you, just for coffee, no expectations, no agenda." For a long moment I said nothing, not out of cruelty but caution. Too many peace offerings had been Trojan horses in the past, invitations that led to guilt trips, financial requests, or veiled attempts to reassert control. But something in her voice was different, not performative, not polished, just tired. I agreed, but on my terms. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, far from the neighborhoods that held our shared history. I arrived early and chose a table by the window, my back to the wall, Daniel waiting in the car around the corner, not to intervene but to be my anchor if I needed to leave quickly. When she walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was grayer, her posture less rigid, the designer scarf she once wore like armor now draped loosely, as if she'd forgotten how to wield it. She didn't apologize right away. Instead, she stirred her tea for a full minute, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't realize," she finally said, eyes fixed on the cup, "how much we asked of you, how much we took." It wasn't a full reckoning, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. "I've been seeing someone," she added quietly. "A therapist. She says we were taught to see love as control, that we thought keeping you close meant keeping you compliant." She looked up then, her eyes glistening. "We were wrong." I didn't cry, I didn't soften instantly, but I nodded, because acknowledgement, even partial, is the first brick in a new foundation. "I'm not here to ask for money," she said quickly, as if reading my mind. "Or forgiveness, I miss you, and I wanted you to know I'm trying to understand." In that moment I saw not the matriarch who'd weaponized guilt, but a woman raised in a generation that equated sacrifice with love, control with care. She hadn't been born cruel, she'd been trained that way. So I offered grace, but with guardrails. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said, "and I'll meet you for coffee again once a month, same place, same rules, but there are conditions." I laid them out clearly. No talk of money, no requests for favors, no contact with my home or my husband without explicit invitation, and absolutely no invoking grandma's name to manipulate my emotions. "This isn't about rejoining the family," I said gently. "It's about building something new between you and me if we can." She accepted without argument, without the old sigh of "you're being so difficult." As we stood to leave, she reached out, hesitated, then simply said, "Thank you for meeting me." I didn't hug her, I didn't offer my hand, but I held her gaze and said, "Take care of yourself, Mom." Walking back to the car, I kept my brass key in my pocket, unoffered, unneeded. Because grace isn't about opening every door. It's about choosing which ones are safe to unlock, and which ones must stay closed. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. I live in a cottage now, small, sun-drenched, tucked behind a row of jasmine vines that bloom every June with a perfume so sweet it drifts through the open windows like a lullaby. It's nothing like the Georgian mansion on Crestview Lane. No grand foyer, no sweeping staircase, no chandelier to catch the light during holiday parties. But it's mine. Not co-owned, not contested, not leveraged as emotional collateral. Just mine. Bought with my name alone on the deed, my savings, and the proceeds from a house that once felt like a gilded cage. The brass key from Crestview sits in a shadow box on my bedroom wall, a relic, not a reminder of loss but of liberation. Beside it, my marriage certificate framed simply in walnut, Grandma Alina's notarized letter preserved under UV protective glass, and a single magnolia petal dried and pressed from the tree where she gave me the truth beneath its branches. Together, they form a quiet altar to everything that was stolen, reclaimed, and finally honored. I don't miss the marble countertops or the guest house or the way the sunlight used to hit the staircase at golden hour. What I do miss, sometimes on quiet nights, is the idea of them. The fantasy that if I'd just been quieter, more agreeable, more selfless, they would have loved me the way I needed. But time has sanded that illusion smooth. I see now that their love wasn't conditional on my goodness, it was conditional on my silence, and I refused to whisper anymore. The motif of the key has transformed. It no longer represents access granted by others, but autonomy claimed by me. I keep a spare on a ribbon in my jewelry box, not to open someone else's door, but to remind myself that I hold the power to lock what harms me and unlock what heals me. And when I host friends for dinner now, I don't check if the china matches or if the napkins are folded just so. I light candles, play soft jazz, and let laughter fill the rooms without fear that joy will be taxed. Grandma visited once before she passed. She sat on my porch swing, wrapped in a quilt I'd sewn myself, and watched the hummingbirds dart between the honeysuckle. "You built a home," she said, "not a house." And in that distinction I heard everything, that safety isn't in square footage but in sovereignty, that peace isn't in perfection but in boundaries honored without apology. Today I sleep with the windows open. No locks turned in fear, no texts waiting to guilt me awake. Just the rustle of leaves, the distant chime of wind bells, and the quiet certainty that I am exactly where I belong. Not because I earned it through sacrifice, but because I claimed it through truth. And sometimes, in the stillness, I touch the shadow box on the wall and whisper, "Thank you for turning the key." If you've ever been told your pain is dramatic for wanting basic respect, if you've ever handed over your hard-earned money, your time, your silence just to keep a fragile peace, if you've hidden your marriage, your therapy, your boundaries because you knew they'd be twisted into weapons against you, then this story wasn't just mine. It was yours too, and I see you, not as the problem in someone else's narrative, but as the quiet architect of your own survival. What happened at that wedding wasn't about a slap. It was about the moment I stopped performing gratitude for conditional love. And what came after the deeds, the court dates, the sheriff at the door, wasn't revenge, it was restoration. Lawful, documented, ethical restoration. Because true justice doesn't require burning the house down. Sometimes it just requires proving you helped build it and that you deserve to walk through the door with your head high. If this resonated, I invite you to share your story in the comments, not for spectacle but for solidarity. Drop a word, a symbol, a lock if you've ever protected your joy in secret, a key if you finally claimed your space. You don't have to name names or relive trauma. Just let someone else know they're not alone in choosing themselves, even when it costs them everything they were taught to value. And if you're standing at the edge of your own reckoning, wondering if it's worth it to speak up, to document, to walk away, I want you to know this: your truth doesn't need an audience to be valid, but it does need evidence to be protected. Start small, save the texts, log the transfers, notarize the letter. Find your elder ally, the one who sees you clearly, even when the rest of the family refuses to look. And if you're facing financial coercion, elder abuse, or property disputes wrapped in family duty, check the description below. I've linked free legal aid directories, documentation templates, and state-specific elder law hotlines, resources I wish I'd known existed years ago. Because you shouldn't have to choose between peace and self-respect. You deserve both. And as for what's next, well, Grandma's letter didn't just save me. After the case closed, 2 of my younger cousins reached out, daughters of my aunts, who'd been quietly funneling money to their parents under similar gift pressure. Using the same legal framework Daniel and I built, they reclaimed their stakes in family cabins, rental properties, even trust funds. Now I volunteer one Saturday a month at the Women's Community Centre, teaching a workshop called Quiet Title, Loud Boundaries. Not as an attorney, but as someone who learned the hard way that love shouldn't cost you your ownership of self. So if you're watching this, know this, your story isn't over. It's just entering its next chapter, the one where you're not the side character but the author. And sometimes the most powerful line you'll ever write is the one that says, "I'm done pretending. I'll leave the light on."